Hello and thank you for joining me once again on the channel. Today we are going to be looking at another Union Pacific wide cab diesel, but this one's a little different. This is a Broadway Limited AC6000. At least it started life as an AC6000. I've wanted a rebuilt unit for a while now. When you see them, they're really cool. They have these railings on the side of the hood, this absolute unit of a radiator on the back, and the stepped walkway here on the driver's side. They're very distinctive and very cool, and it's always a treat to catch one when you're rail fanning. The problem is if you want a rebuilt unit, you have to go with brass, which can be pricey or hard to find. The other option is the Broadway Limited model, which represents an as-delivered unit, but these have also been out of production for a little while, but they're a little easier to obtain. So that's what I ended up going with. I took a Broadway Limited model of an AC6000 and wanted to do a rebuild, but before Wabtec did their full rebuilds in 2023, this represents more what could be considered a convertible. We have the single exhaust stack up front, the K3 horn, and a few other minor detail changes, but this is mostly the Broadway Limited model under the hood, and let me show you what I did to change out the electronics, change out the detailing, and how I got from a stock first run model to this. This is a Broadway Limited Imports AC6000. My first diesel from Broadway Limited, actually, and it happens to be from the first run when they had QSI decoders. I think this dates to the early mid-2000s or so. Interestingly, this one is labeled as having a non-sound decoder inside. It was sold to me like that for a good price. The original run of these models had a few issues, ignoring the decoder for now. The axles have taken their cue from Bachmann in the 90s and will split. The elasticizer in the plastic dissipates over time, and the axles shrink against the metal of the wheels, and they crack. The other issue with these models are the LEDs. They are blue, or a very cool white, and it just looks bad. My last concern with this model in particular are some of the specific details. If this were a CSX model, it would be fine, but as a UP unit, there are some things that absolutely need to change. And I'll mention that these details did change in subsequent releases from BLI. My guess is that for the first run, BLI had one set of moldings and they just painted them differently, keeping the details the same. Later releases are better about road-specific details generally. The front and rear handrails are incorrect as well, and those need to be replaced. The rear of the deck is the wrong shape too. Some of the details, like the grills on the side of the cab, are also incorrect, but this is not as noticeable to me like the handrails and the ditch lights, so I'm willing to overlook some of those imperfections. Up on the hood, we have dual exhausts and a 5-chime horn, correct for an as-delivered unit. This dual exhaust will be changed to a single exhaust, and the horn will be changed to a 3-chime horn. The cab roof will be adorned with a GPS dome and some other antenna bits, matching prototype photos as best I can, and the entire thing will be weathered and faded to look sun-beaten and well-worn. It is not my intention to repaint this with the big flag on the side or anything like that. But let's check under the hood to see what we're dealing with before worrying about all the aesthetics. So right off the bat, we can see there is a lot happening here. Just looking at it, I have no idea what this board on the front is. It is connected to the factory motherboard at the back with an 8-pin connector. You can see under this front board, the chassis weight appears to have been grinded down to allow for this decoder install, and the mystery board is held in place with some foam adhesive. With my NCE power cab, I tested the locomotive and discovered it is an MRC decoder by checking the manufacturing code. Pressing F12 for some reason activates the sound. Providing for a pretty good jump scare. So this model does have sound despite what the box says. It is an aftermarket install though, and maybe the seller just didn't know that. The sound quality it's bad. That might be the speaker or the decoder or both. None of the function mapping makes any sense to me. I couldn't get it to lower the volume either, despite what I read online about MRC decoders. It doesn't really matter as all this is going away. Speaking of the speaker, this is why you do not want speakers in the fuel tank. The speaker was added after the fact. The magnet from the speaker picks up all sorts of metal bits and debris found over your layout and your workbench, and you end up with a speaker that will destroy itself over time. Do not do this. Literally anywhere else is better than in the fuel tank for a speaker install, unless you were maybe using sugar cubes and a baffle that protects them, but even then I wouldn't personally do that unless that was my only choice for a speaker install. I removed the speaker and used it as a template to make some round discs out of styrene, which I painted gray with Tamiya paint. These were glued into where the speakers would sit inside the fuel tank to prevent any more debris from getting in the chassis or near the motor. With no speaker magnets to pull junk up off the rails, this was less likely to happen, but I wasn't going to chance it. So the whole electronics suite in this thing needs to go. Here's another shot of the MRC board and Scotch tape used to connect the wires together. Pro tip, do not use Scotch tape in place of solder. I removed this MRC decoder and scraped the foam adhesive off of the chassis weight after removing it, and the MRC board is salvageable, but I have no intentions of using it. I might hang on to it just as a relic, but underneath where the decoder was mounted, you can see the chassis weight was ground down flat by the previous owner in order to better fit the decoder under the shell. I'm not sure how necessary this was, but looking at a photo in a review of the original run of this model on modelrailroader.com, you can see the weight has a bit of a hump behind the cab. Even with this extra weight removed, this is a heavy locomotive, and I don't think that weight will be missed by me, but I do appreciate the extra space. Towards the rear, there are these posts on the chassis weight used to hold the factory 8-pin board, but these just get in the way. So I've ground down both sets of these posts, and the speaker will sit at the back. In place of the MRC board, I've decided to go with a Lokesound 5 21-pin decoder on a Decoder Buddy by Nix Trains. Where the factory board sat at the back will be an ESU 50348 passive radiator speaker. I had considered all different kinds of speakers and setups, but I really wanted to try one of these things. There's plenty of room to add a current keeper if you really want to, but after thinking about it, I wanted to try a slightly more extreme speaker setup. I picked up a second one of these ESU speakers. These are 4 ohm speakers and wired together in series puts an 8 ohm load on the amp in the decoder. This will reduce the load on the amp, and it will make the speakers a little quieter, but I think it sounds great, honestly. I used a little piece of styrene glued to the end of the front of the speaker, and this is to help keep the wires from the rear truck pickups and the rear light off the diaphragm of the speaker. This probably isn't really necessary, but it's just a little extra insurance to prop those wires up. Going to the lights for a bit, 3mm LEDs are attached to this PCB board up front. My intention is to reuse these boards and replace the blue police lights with warm white LEDs. The ditch light LEDs will be removed entirely and replaced with surface mount LEDs size 0603 in warm white and wired in separately. The wires on the board are traced so I can reuse it for powering the number boards and the headlight. Before removing the old LEDs, I measured their distance from the bottom of the LED to the PCB board for the number boards and the rear headlight. They sit about 6mm up from the boards they are mounted on. The headlight sits just under 10mm from where it's mounted. To replace the factory LEDs with similar warm white LEDs, I heated up the solder at the base of the legs on the board and just pulled the old LEDs out. This opened up the mounting holes on the PCB board for the new LEDs, and I bent the legs on the new LEDs 90 degrees and inserted them into the holes in the board, set the height distances from the board using calipers, and added new solder to hold them in place. The left leg of the LED as it is inserted into the board is the anode, or the positive, in case anyone is wondering. For tracing the wires, looking down from the top, this is how the board is set up. The red lines represent the left leg of the number boards, the blue line represents the right leg of the number boards, the orange line represents the left leg of the headlight, and the pink line represents the right leg of the headlight. The lights were covered up with some shrink tubing, mimicking the original factory setup to try to prevent light bleed. When testing this, I did note that there was still a lot of light bleed from around the backs of the LEDs and through the shell, particularly at the rear headlight. For the rear headlight, I applied some tulip puffy t-shirt paint around the inside of the shell where the light bleed was particularly bad. This is around the sand hatch covers. I also applied this paint around the rear of the LEDs in general, coating the backs and the edges around the shrink wrap, and when this dried, I fired up the lights to see if there was any more light bleed and applied more paint if it happened to shone through. I think it only took about 2 coats of paint to get a really solid light blocking. I'll mention that all of the factory wiring for the trucks, the motor, the connections, lighting, everything was replaced with super flexible 30-gauge silicone insulated strand copper wire from BN Tech Go. That is the brand name. This wire strips easily, solders easy, it's easy to cut. I'm a big fan and I use it in nearly all of my installs when I'm replacing or adding wires into a project. If you want to strictly follow NMRA wiring standards for colors, they have all the colors you need, but I just get a huge roll of black insulated wire and use that instead. I have an affiliate link in the description from Amazon if you want to try it for yourself. For the ditch lights, I used resin 3D parts from Wallace Locomotive Works. All of my pilot-mounted GE-style ditch lights are now using these resin pieces from Wallace, with the exception of UP6867, which was my first project installing that style and uses brass detail parts. The resin paints easy, doesn't short out your LEDs, and is much easier to work with. However, I will recommend that they get a coat of primer before color, and the LEDs will shine through the resin and the paint if it isn't super opaque paint, so use a primer to help block that. I held the housings in place on the pilot, marked where the holes were going to be drilled, and used my pin vise to make those holes to allow the wires to feed through to the board. I added some microcrystal clear to the housings to act as lenses. This glue dries clear and makes for excellent lenses for small headlights, small windows, anything like that. My surface mount LEDs have red and blue wires. The red goes to the universal positive, the blue to whatever function. The Decoder Buddy has resistors on board, so I did not have to wire any in. Next, I wanted to remove the cracked axle gears and replace them. I actually had no idea that these models suffered from this issue initially. Luckily, Northwest Shortline offers replacements, and they came out in January of this year, mere weeks before I purchased this model, actually. This is product number 29886-6. This is what I ended up going with. This is the full set of 6 gears, and they were a perfect fit. They are pricey. I think it ended up being about $56 for the package. In fact, the cost of these replacement gears was a good chunk of what the model originally cost me. But now I'll likely never have to worry about the axle gears cracking or anything like that. So we have our new gears and our upside down NMRA standards gauge. First, I removed the bottom plate from the trucks and pushed these tabs to remove the side frames. This freed the wheels. The metal wheels just fell out of the axle since those were broken anyway. I went through each one and installed them into the new gears, gently twisting the wheels as I applied pressure. I checked the wheel spacing with the gauge after every twist to make sure everything was spot on. Once all the wheels were seated in their new axles, I painted the wheel surfaces with a brown paint pen for a base color, and then a mix of brown and black for a grimy look. The wheels were then reinstalled, a little bit of grease applied, and the trucks reassembled. As far as the drivetrain is concerned, that is really all that I had to do. As this is supposed to be a post-2007 locomotive, it needs the FRA safety stripes on the sill. I found the red really tough to remove, and I figured trying would not be worth the effort or potential damage to the plastic. I decided that just painting over the sill would be the best effect to get the gray base that I wanted. I masked off all the areas I did not want painted, and then hit it with a Tamiya IJN gray. This is TS66 Cure Arsenal. In fact, this is the gray I used for most of my Harbor Mist gray sort of touch-up. This gray is warmer than the factory gray, and I find it to be close enough to Harbor Mist, especially when you're blending it with some weathering. I think it looks fine. Before putting the handrails back on, I used reflective striping from Smokebox Graphics. This is now a retired product, unfortunately, but there are a few other sources of reflective striping, so just do a Google search, you'll find a bunch. At the rear of the handrails, there are extra stanchions which are not featured on the Union Pacific examples, so I removed these carefully and sanded away the plastic that was left behind on the railings. The mounting hole that was left behind was filled with some styrene rod, cut and sanded flush, and painted gray. The front anti-climber can be removed. I pulled it out to make removing the ditch light platforms easier. The ditch light housings do leave behind some mounting holes that are wide open with the platforms removed, and those were filled with some bits of styrene, shaped and sanded, and eventually painted to blend in. The rear deck is the wrong shape for Union Pacific, so to correct this, I cut out a pattern from another model, an Athearn AC4400 specifically, and using some flush cutters, removed the excess material, filing and shaping it as necessary. I think the deck may be a little shorter than the prototype, but it's negligible as far as I'm concerned. Some of the pilot details were missing on the front, like the air hoses. I replaced these and the MU receptacles. The ones that came on the model are these weird open ones, with what looks like cables inserted, but cut a few feet out. I don't know. The receptacles are Wallace Locomotive Works parts again, resin 3D printed, on the rear pilot. One of these MU receptacles is extended out. I took a ditch light part from a Blue Box AC44, cut it down some, and added the Wallace receptacle to the end of it, and then just glued it in place. The MU hoses are CalScale 190-724 plastic 3-line MU hoses, and these fit perfectly. The coupler cut levers are molded in white, but on the prototype these are mostly gray, so I painted them and left the handles on the ends white. The change from the dual exhaust to a single exhaust might be the biggest aesthetic change on this model and the most invasive. Naturally, I was hesitant to start removing bits of the shell, but figured that if I didn't do this, this project will stall out, and it was going to go back in the box for another year, which I really wanted to avoid. I pulled the exhaust housings out of the top of the shell. They are just glued in place, but they didn't fight too much. Next, I used a modeler's chisel to remove the raised walls that went around the two exhausts. From what I understand, UP plated over the original exhaust locations, and I'm pretty much doing the same thing. I measured the squares left by the exhaust details in the shell, and cut some thin styrene to fit. This was glued in place. gaps, minor gaps, were filled in with a tiny amount of Vallejo putty, and then I used the chisel again to shape that styrene flat onto the hood. I carved the area where the exhaust was going to sit, which has a slight hump. This allows the single exhaust to sit flat on the top of the hood. I then added new walls that go around the exhaust using some thin styrene made into a rectangle. That blue box AC4400 came to my aid again. I used it as a pattern maker for this part. The new walls of the exhaust are 12 millimeters long and 6 millimeters wide. At first I made the walls 2 millimeters tall, but this ended up much too tall, so I crafted a second one just under 1 millimeter tall, and it looks much more appropriate. The new GE style exhaust is another Wallace Locomotive Works part. I painted this with primer and Tamiya bare metal silver before figuring out where it was supposed to go. The horn is a brass Details West K3 style horn. I filed away some of the very minor casting lines, then hit it with some etch primer. This should help the Tamiya paint stick to the metal a little bit better. And then it was installed after filling and painting in the original horn's mounting holes with some styrene rod. The BLI model is reasonably detailed, but it is missing the air filter under the sill. Again, this is another Wallace Locomotive Works piece, a Salem air filter specifically. The lettering on this locomotive will be left alone, however, I wanted to renumber it to something I've seen, and I considered which number to do all while working on this. The first step to renumbering, however, is removing the original number, 7573. I tried everything from soaking the numbers in microsol on a paper towel, scraping at it with a toothpick, using tape to try to rip up the numbers. All of it was unsuccessful. BLI used a very tough printing on these things. I ended up scraping off the numbers with an X-Acto blade, but I did not like using the straight blades for this, as I felt like I was digging into the paint and the plastic just a little too easily, so I ordered up some curved blades and felt like I had a lot more control over the removal process. If you are nervous about removing tough lettering with a hobby knife, try something like this. They are short and I think easier to control where the blade is scraping. I have another Amazon affiliate link in the description for these blades if you want to try them. I did the same scraping for the numbers on the radiator on the back, and then I gloss coated the radiator housing and the cab to prep them for their decals. You always want to apply decals to a glossy surface, as this prevents silvering. I used a number of decals from Microscale and ended up going with Union Pacific 7331. 7331 actually came through Austin in January 2025, leading a mixed freight, and I got a good shot of it coming around the curve just past the bridge in downtown Austin. Of course, it had been rebuilt like all of the others, but I am going off reference photos of it from before 2023 to guide me, and mine will represent a locomotive from between 2008 and roughly 2019. I also used some pieces from other Microscale sets for UP diesels. The second GE plate on the nose and the surface transportation board notices on the rear sill all came from my random cut-up sheets of decals. The gloss I use is a Tamiya clear coat from a spray can, which is chemically very hot and will destroy decals if you go heavy at first. Go very light at first, give it plenty of drying time between coats. This ensures that the decals are protected and allows for heavier follow-up coats. This helps bury the decals and should hide the edges of the decal film. I let the gloss coats cure completely, giving it a few days to be safe, then hit it with some flat clear across the shell. Some folks will apply decals and then go straight to flat clear coat to protect them, but I always hit them with gloss first and then flat. I find that this helps bury the decals further, and I always think it looks a little bit better. The number boards are separate pieces that come out of the cab assembly. I removed the original numbers and applied some Tamiya black with a brush. Now, when I was doing this, I did not really consider the fact that the paint would prevent the light from shining through. I haven't really messed with lightable number boards before, so in the future I may redo this and use some Microscale lightable number board decals that allow lights to shine through the numbers, but for now I think it looks good. I'm just going to not use that lighting feature until that gets changed out. The locomotive came with a few crew figures like most BLI models do. These are fine figures, and honestly I've been using them a lot in other models lately to fill out cabs because they're cheap. They are just generic enough in their clothing that they could fit most eras, but they really need a high-vis vest or something a little more contemporary. Using some orange paint, I painted a vest on both figures before putting them back in the cab. I was able to source replacement front and rear handrails and fit them in place. Getting the spacing right was a pain in the butt to do, but they're in there and I'm happy as a result. At this point, the model was mostly complete and ready to run, so I brought it to the club layout for its first real test. The model ran beautifully. I had no shorting issues, no loss of power, it pulled everything I asked. Now, the model at this point was not completed. I had a few final touches to make. The cab roof had all the antennas removed, mounting holes painted and filled, and a GPS dome and other bits from an Athearn Genesis PTC antenna kit were used. I'll mention here too that the driver's side is missing the little mirror beneath the windows. I'm actually still waiting for a replacement part to come in so I can fix that too, but just pointing it out. The model at this point is ready for weathering. First thing I did was use some Tamiya panel liner on the grills, filling them in. The brake wheel was also painted black. Fading and chipping effects were next. Peeled lettering with a little bit of white paint on a fine brush. I applied a simple grime wash with some earth brown to the hood, wiped off excess with cotton swabs. Mixes of raw sienna, umber, black, brown, and white were all used to fade the paint. There's not a lot of good roof shots, so I took some creative license there. I chipped some of the edges, faded the paint, added some soot around the exhaust. This is all with a brush. I didn't use an airbrush for this one. I also used some pan pastels to help with the fading effects on the sides of the hood and the nose there. The trucks did get a coat of brown and umber, and the fuel tank received some black and brown washes for some fuel spillage. And finally, the model was hit with a flat clear coat to seal everything in. I'm not going to go too deep into the programming. I did start with the sound profile S0540 from ESU. This is a GE 7FDL 16-cylinder prime mover, the one I used in a few other locomotives. And this is what I used it when it ran at the club the first time. Since the locomotive I've modeled is a converted AC6000, I'm pretty sure most of them have this prime mover in them. I have since swapped over to Project S0510, the AC44C6M profile, and I did swap over the K3 horn from the previous project onto this one because the AC44C6M profile does not have any K3 horns, and I liked the one from the previous project, so I just made sure it was included. And that was pretty much it for this project. This was a fun mix of it. Internal wiring changes and upgrading, external detail additions, weathering. I really didn't have to mess with the mechanism except to add a little fresh grease and oil and those new gears. And it's a smooth runner and one of my best, I would argue. Now, was all of this worth it? For me, I'd say so. I had a lot of fun changing the details, trying new techniques, seeing what worked and what didn't. This sort of thing is my favorite part of the hobby, and I got a really nice running model of a very distinctive wide cab. It's not completely accurate, but I'm okay with that. So overall, I'm very pleased with how this has turned out. It's a wonderful runner. I think it sounds amazing. And while I know it's not 100% accurate to a Union Pacific AC4460, it's close enough for me, and I'm very happy with the performance and everything with it. So if you want to get one of these and do a conversion like this with the single exhaust, the K3 chime horn, upgrading the cab roof here, it's all very simple. This had a lot more extra things I needed to do because it was a first run with the incorrect handrails and the blue lights and the weird electronic suite that was inside that had to be removed and gutted completely. But in the end, I'm left with a very fine runner. It looks good for me. I'm very happy with the way this has turned out. If I can do this sort of conversion work, I think anyone can. It's very simple. It has been a while since Broadway Limited has run their AC6000s in HO scale. I know they did a recent run in N scale, but they are out there. I'm thinking about picking up a CSX unit next. And if anyone has one for sale, please let me know in the comments. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed following along. If you did, stay tuned for more. I've got a few other things I'm working on at this moment, changing details and upgrading components and that sort of thing. So there's bound to be more in the future. Please consider liking the video. If you have any questions, or if I glossed over anything or wasn't clear on something, please ask in the comments below. I will try to answer the best I can. But that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. So I have realized this is my 150th video. I'm at about 1,900 subscribers right now. I'm hoping to hit 2,000 by summer. And there's just a few other things I want to mention before wrapping the video up entirely. I know it kind of looked like it ended, but last summer I kind of hit a roadblock of just not wanting to do anything relating to trains. When we went to Japan in September, I filmed a lot of trains, but I didn't buy anything. I did buy this awesome shirt though. But since the new year, I've kind of hit into high gear a little bit more, and I've been more interested in working on all the projects and getting things out that I've been wanting to do. The AC6000 conversion project probably didn't need to happen so soon. That was really kind of on a whim. I have so many other projects that need to be completed before I needed to do that. It was relatively easy to do, so I didn't mind knocking it out that much. But I do have a lot going on now, as you can see. I did just get this in the mail today. It's a second Verisun Walters Proto 4-bay covered hopper. I already have one that I haven't done anything with, but I'm pretty sure these are going to be discontinued, and I wanted two. I always wanted two. I only bought the one because it was $50 at the train show that I picked it up at. Got this for, I think, $39, so a little cheaper, but they're cool. I like them a lot. It's just a matter of getting into here and pulling up photos that I've taken of these as they've passed and getting some work done on it. A couple of other things. This Southern Pacific auto rack, this started life as a Canadian Pacific, I believe, auto rack. May have been Canadian National. This is one of those Walters kits that I picked up at one of the train shows, and I wanted to do a Southern Pacific auto rack, one that I've seen, and I have footage of one that has the panels with the Southern Pacific logo over here as opposed to over here, and big graffiti piece on the side, and found photos of the other side of that particular car, and it has another big piece, I think in the middle here somewhere. So I'm going to replicate that one. So this is all decal applications. Tried to match the paint as best I could to the rest of the car. It looks okay, I think. But that's an ongoing one. I need to get some more 28-inch wheels. I don't have enough for all the auto racks I'm working on. This is the Grand Funk Western auto rack. This started life as a Grand Trunk Western auto rack. This color blue, that dark blue, and I tried to fade it with an airbrush with some thinned out white. It did not work. I might do another video on this one later, but it's currently getting pieces of graffiti here. Once I saw that there was a Grand Trunk Western auto rack that someone renamed as Grand Funk Western, I had to go ahead and do that. It's out there if you look up photos of it. Couldn't tell you the number. It's not the number of this car, but whatever. God. This scale trains are an exact rail high cube boxcar. I'm doing some weathering and matching the car number to the graffiti, a real life prototype. Other side has not been touched yet, but we're getting there. I picked up one of these Rapido Greenbrier reefers. Thought they're really cool. I should have picked up a Lineage one. I think they're really cool too, but I wasn't really thinking about it at the time. So I'll see if at the upcoming train shows if there's anything available. So I might pick up another one or two of these. We'll see. And this big boy right here. I thought it would be cool to do some graffiti on an auto rack. I'll do both sides, one in O gauge. This is an MTH auto rack, and then I'm going to throw it on eBay and see if people want to pay me for the work. I know Lionel and MTH are offering graffiti colored freight cars now, but it all looks kind of clean and samey, and I'm basing mine off of stuff that exists in real life, based off of photos that I've taken. So yeah, that's kind of what's going on right now. Another cool thing that happened recently was I was on TV talking about upcoming programming with the train club at the Texas State History Museum, where we did a spring break program. I'll link that up in the corner, one of those corners, if you want to check it out. But I got to talk about, what makes model trains exciting and talk about the club a little bit. It was really fun. Being on live TV, a little scary, but it was cool. That's gonna do it for now. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.